Welcome to Round Hill Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy in the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we talk about when we talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie, on this morning after the Super Bowl.
Morning after the Super Bowl. I almost forgot the intro halfway through. I was starting it, and I was like, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. I stayed up way past my bedtime and still didn't watch the end of the Super Bowl. I was like, oh, there was overtime? That's fun.
Right? Somebody won finally, so there we are.
Somebody won. I figured I'd wake up to someone having won it. As my friend said in a text this morning, no skin in the game for us. So
Yep, let it be.
I was like, that's great. That's great. So what are we talking about today?
Well, we are almost halfway through the month of February. We've been exploring the theme of justice, and thought it might be interesting to think a little bit about what makes this word easier to talk about than some of our other virtuous words, and maybe more difficult to talk about.
Sure.
And I guess I asked that question because way back when we were planning this, I actually had some personal resistance to justice, not because I don't care about it, but because it is such it feels like a much larger topic than some of the others, and maybe a little less accessible. Sometimes we've talked about the fact that justice is often equated in the minds of many people with forces perhaps we think beyond our control. I mean, that's not true, but we think about justice taking place in forums and in halls of power and debate that don't feel like they're accessible to us easily. It's not that they're inaccessible completely, but it's not easy to get to them. And I would just use as an example, that when issues are being debated in the State House in Hartford, we can, as citizens of this state, we can speak on issues. We can sign up to testify and give testimony on different kinds of matters that relate to justice. But again, it can involve going up to Hartford. There's a journey involved, and it pushes us out of our comfort zone, both literally and metaphorically. So I think part of the challenge is to make justice feel like it is in fact within our grasp, and how is it that we can make a contribution right where we are, even if we feel we're somewhat limited in terms of mobility. How can we still be a part of it? So that's kind of what's on my mind this morning.
And it kind of feels like there's multiple elements of the word justice. There's legal justice. There's justice being served, being, someone being appropriately prosecuted for a crime, or being, not. I'm very eloquent this morning, clearly. But then also I think there's this idea of justice as equality, of justice as all people being treated fairly outside of a court system. Right? It just feels like justice as a world identity, or as a state of the world that we strive for. And that's sort of an interesting idea. And so when you're approaching justice, is it the latter you're thinking of as you're preaching on it, or?
Well, I think that what I've tried to do, I guess one way to answer your question is I've tried to find stories that provide entryways into this big topic, understanding that we could be finding stories for a very, very long time. So what are the ones that we can choose, that are perhaps most immediate? And so that's what compelled me to think about starting with the prophet Amos, who says, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That's one of the great images of justice. But then it's, it moves into the experience of Moses, for example, who's commanded by God to lead the people of Israel out of their bondage in Egypt out to the promised land. And so he becomes a spokesperson for justice. He did not ask for the job. He did not want the job. He tried to refuse the job, but he wound up doing it anyway. And maybe that's, so those are stories that are entry points. That's how I've kind of worked with it. By the way, I think that's one other reason why the theme of justice can sometimes feel a little more challenging for people is that sometimes we get caught up in justice and we may not initiate that journey. Whereas we think about generosity, gratitude, using our imagination, the theme of love, those feel like things that kind of come out of us maybe a little bit more naturally. They're within our daily grasp. Whereas justice, the call of justice, might come to us at an unwelcome time, challenging us to do a thing that may seem far beyond our capacity, may even put us in danger. And I think of a story in a little book called It's Our World Too, which is a kind of a collection of stories from children and youth who became justice advocates, even when they weren't expecting to be that. And one young boy witnessed something happen in his neighborhood, an act of racism in his neighborhood towards a local family. And when the police came into the neighborhood to question the residents, basically everyone said, nope, didn't see anything. Nope, didn't see anything, until they got to this young man's door. I think he was 14 or 15 at the time. And he said, yes, I saw what happened. And so he testified in court. And several people were convicted and sent off to juvenile detention facilities. And so when he and his mom went back to, they wanted to continue their life in that neighborhood, he received so many threats that he actually had to move from this neighborhood in Philadelphia to go live with relatives in another place. And he actually graduated from high school somewhere else. Yeah. So, I mean, it was a very costly thing, but he stood up and did it. And I think that's the other side of justice that, challenges us. So that's not an exact answer to your question, but it's starting with stories, I think, rather than, big definitions where we can easily get lost in the grandeur of all that.
I can appreciate that. I mean, isn't that how Jesus taught, was through stories and parables and helping us, I think, finding the humanity in it, finding the people in it instead of it being a huge concept. I think those stories you're telling are helping us have faces and places to something that can feel ephemeral.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking back a time in my life when I lived in a city, and I certainly was hoping that I and my congregation would become more involved in some of the challenges faced by the neighborhood, because there were challenges in some ways that we faced as well. And when I happened to talk with some people in the community about that, who had a lot of had a long track record of working on issues in cities to get to successful change, they said, don't start with policies, don't start with that big overarching thing. Start with people. Listen to people, talk with people. So that usually means that you go out and you have these one-on-one conversations, get to know people. Where are they at that particular point in life? What are their children doing if they have children? What are their main loves and hobbies? And as you get to know people first, then they'll say, yeah, it really bothers me that we don't have a stop sign down at that corner. I'm so worried for the kids of this neighborhood every time they cross the street. And then everybody says, yes, I hate the fact that we don't have a stop sign down there. And that becomes your first justice issue to work on. And what community organizers often call the low-hanging fruit. And then, you kind of build up from there. And I think that's now my image of working for justice. Where does it start for the people who are most affected by the thing that's wrong?
What do you think? Is there current low-hanging fruit in the eco-justice fight?
That's a great question. That is a kind of a thought I keep in mind as I do work in Greenwich, and I'm on the town sustainability committee, and we've been working with Quiet Yards Greenwich, and there are so many wonderful groups and people working on these issues. For students at Greenwich High School, the low-hanging fruit a few years ago was the declaration of a climate emergency. They said that's really where the town has to start. And the town leaders need to recognize that there is a climate change emergency, and we need to declare it and then put all of our policies in place behind it. And so that was the low hanging fruit for them. But I think one good example of that, has been the issue around gas leaf blowers in town, which, may not sound like a justice issue to start with, but wow, it's certainly an issue for peace of mind.
It's a sanity issue, I
It
feel
is a sanity issue for sure. Oh my gosh. And it'll save us from doing unjust things, if we can address this one. So I really think that was a good example of starting somewhere, getting change, which did happen in Greenwich, so that there's been some change around the times of year when people can use gas leaf blowers. And, that gave many people the opportunity to hear that some landscape companies are already using electric machinery and doing just fine. Thank you. So despite all of the hue and cry that it would ruin their businesses, this has not turned out to be the case. Right?
Yes.
So I think those are some examples of low-hanging fruit, and it's better to start there as well, because you start talking with people about, the whole coastline is going to change, and water is going to start rising with every successive storm. It just breeds fear, and people will kind of flinch from getting involved in that. So I guess that would be one good example, and for a way in which people have found a way to get involved in the bigger
that's
movement.
Great. Yeah, because I remember, it felt like every day you were hearing for hours the gas leaf blowers, and it didn't seem to be during the leaf season necessarily.
Right. Yep. And I think when people get started with something like that, they may say, really, is that our biggest justice issue? Well, no, of course it isn't. But the whole point is you're giving people a chance to, train towards something bigger. They're getting a chance to kind of build their muscles before they tackle something that might have to be much, much larger. Right. And I think that's the advantage of focusing on the low-hanging fruit. I think
that's really interesting. Is that idea of getting involved, in something that feels manageable and not like you're, is not a big risk necessarily, but it's getting comfortable with the players and getting comfortable in the saying, sticking up for your community, which I think is bold and brave unto itself.
Yeah. Well, I think that justice, one way I've come to look at it is that when things hit close enough to home, we will find a way to get involved in issues of justice. And if that's the feeling that our child has been discriminated in some way, if we feel like our family has been discriminated, or if we're not receiving equal access to resources that other people in the community, we'll step up. That's where love will get loud. Get in the way of parents and watch out. And I'm glad of that. Because that often, a lot of justice movements start with an angry parent. Right?
Yeah.
Why?
I can appreciate that.
Why is my child not getting this program? Why are we not being included in this resource if we, as we should be? So I think that justice, as we've sometimes, I think, discussed this a little bit, that justice is another name for love. You're still, but it's a ferocious, experience of love. It can be a fierce, a protective, and that's wonderful. That's a wonderful gift, and we have that capacity whenever we really need to step up and stand out. That God-given capacity is there, and oddly enough, a lot of people that I've known over the years have said that they were never more frightened than when they got involved in a big justice issue, a big struggle against a mighty adversary on an issue that mattered to them, but they never felt more alive. And so I think that's the thing to hold together. And hey, as we go forward, with all of our listeners who are also connected to wider communities, who knows how we might be called upon to become engaged in an effort, a movement, a cause that seems so much larger than we are, but it can be realized when we are gathered with other people. When we stop being one person and start being a whole community, that's then we're moving in the right direction. And I hope that's going to be increasingly true around all the issues that matter for us.
Absolutely. I think you also hit on something really fundamental, because I know, speaking for myself, I'm not great at sticking up for myself or like demanding things necessarily. Like I'll be like, it's fine. I can handle whatever. Like I'm flexible. I'll make it work. But if you so much as give a sideways glance to my kid,
There you go.
will hunt you down. I will go full mama bear on you, and it's so interesting that I'm like, I will go to bat for her. I will, I will stand up for whatever I need to stand up for her in a way I would never do for myself. I'm like, it's fine. It's fine. I'm like, don't look at her.
Yeah.
If she does not want you looking at her, and I think that almost makes it easier, because it's this idea that, we can stand up for other people. I actually have a little funny story that when I was living in Stamford, we had this neighbor that would burn all sorts of things, leaves, trash, whatever. This is a fairly nice neighborhood. It was actually, it was a very nice neighborhood. Every neighborhood is. This is a particularly nice neighborhood. And he would just burn stuff. And you'd see the black smoke just wafting over it. And it was so annoying.
Yeah.
And our neighbors would text us and be like, are you going to do something about this? And I was like, what?
Yeah.
You also could do something about this.
Aren't we all here? Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I'm pretty sure you're a neighbor too, friend. But then my in-laws were here, and it was like 4th of July weekend. I mean, it was like a holiday celebration weekend, and we were outside, and he was burning stuff, and my mother-in-law started coughing because the noxious fumes were causing the ash that was blowing over onto our property was causing her to cough. And I was like, well, that's it.
Yep.
Like I could this was a few years ago now. I was tolerant to a degree, and I didn't want to make a fuss. Yep. I didn't want to like cause a whole scene. I didn't want to do a whole thing. But then my sweet mother-in-law, who has some health problems, and I was like, well, now it's on.
Right.
And I called every number I could find. And like 3 fire trucks came. And I will admit, I took a little bit of pleasure in that. Because this guy was really annoying.
Journey.
And I had finally like stood up and it's, for the record, completely against town ordinance to burn stuff in Stamford. Like this was not okay from the beginning. This was not just an irritation. This was like against the town's rules. Yep. But it really took for someone else to be affected directly in that way for me to be like, oh, okay, yes, I guess this is worth the seeming risk. I didn't want to like cause a fuss. I didn't want to cause bad neighbor bad neighbor relations. I didn't want to be that person, but I was just like,
Yeah.
But it was interesting. It really took that for me to be, to sort of take what I appreciate sounds like a ridiculous, like there's no risk, but I didn't want to cause a fuss. And this person, I was a little bit, he didn't make me very comfortable to begin with. So I was like, I don't want to cause a whole thing. But it's interesting that idea of what would it take for you to step up or what it takes for us to say enough is enough, even on such a tiny, this is such a tiny scale, obviously this story, but this idea that I think for a lot of people, stepping up and saying enough or stepping up and saying, no, this isn't right, is done from a place of love. And often for love of other people, of their family or friends. And I think it's an interesting part of that idea that you're bringing to us today, of that justice is another word for love. I think can often be a motivating factor in how we fight for justice, because we're fighting for our love of our fellow person.
Mm-hmm. It's a great point. And I think maybe along the justice journey, what happens is that we're discovering how to love other people we don't know with a similar intensity as we love the people we do know. And, that we start to see all people as children of God, or all people as worthy of the fair and equal treatment. And now our circle grows larger. And that can be a very rewarding moment when we've experienced that enlargement of our vision. Yeah.
Yeah. So those big leaps of love and justice, those little leaps of love and justice, they add up, and they can, dip our toe in with little tiny things like calling the fire department on our neighbor.
And then it just steamrolls from there.
And I felt like, okay, I could stick up, like that little bit of like, okay, I was a brave person today. It sounds so stupid, but I think it adds up, and it gives you that idea that like, I am just one person, but I can make a difference. And like you started off our episode saying, everyone can go to the capital of your state or our country and let your voice be heard in different ways. That is, as citizens of this country, that is a right entitled to us in various ways. There's so many levels of justice, aren't there, big and small?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we can be patient with ourselves. I think that there are some people who are working on every one of those levels all the time. And I've kind of made my peace with the fact that, it may not be my calling right at the moment to be doing that level of work, which has let's say, an especially broad focus, that maybe right now my goal is to do something that's, very much within the circle of my loved ones or my church community or my town. But it could happen one day that focus will need to be enlarged. And I hope that whenever that happens for us, we'll say yes and know that we're not doing it alone. And as Martin Luther King used to say, we always have the cosmic companionship of God. And I love that phrase. And so that, wherever we are on the journey, literally, that presence is there, and we can follow the journey through wherever it might go.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ed. And thank you, one and all, for joining us today. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your acts of love and justice. Please always feel free to leave a comment or send us an email. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.